Infertility isn't something you plan for. It's not like anyone grows up dreaming of sitting in sterile clinics with their feet in stirrups, hearing words like low chance, unlikely, or maybe adoption is your best path. For years, my husband and I tried everything: hormone shots, IUI, endless rounds of IVF we could barely afford. Every month became another wound. Friends would announce pregnancies over brunch like it was casual, and I'd smile, then cry in the bathroom later. When that test finally turned positive, I almost didn't believe it. I stared at the two faint pink lines like they were lying to me, like my eyes were playing a trick. I whispered to my husband, "I think it worked." We both held each other and sobbed on the bathroom floor. After years of nothing but heartbreak, we finally had hope. Of course, I told my mom. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd share in our happiness. She didn't. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, and said in that dry, cold tone of hers, "Don't get excited. You'll probably lose it, like you lose everything." I felt like she'd punched me. Here I was, terrified but hopeful, and she turned it into a curse. My husband tried to jump in, but I shook my head. I learned a long time ago, arguing with her only made it worse. My pregnancy was high risk. Complications piled up: high blood pressure, early contractions, endless bed rest. And when my son came into the world early, tiny, fragile, his chest working so hard to breathe, I thought, for once, she might soften. Maybe seeing him hooked up to tubes would make her realize he was still a miracle. But when relatives asked her about the baby, she said, "A weak start means a weak life. Don't waste blessings on him." I can't describe the anger that lit up in me. Every parent of a premature baby knows how much fight those kids have in them. They're warriors. But my own mother had already written him off. Still, I wanted her to be part of his life. I told myself maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe she'd warm up. One night, desperate and exhausted, I called her and asked if she could babysit so I could pick up a few hours at work. Her laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. "I raised you, and that was enough of a failure," she sneered. "Don't ask me to raise another." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. My husband found me sobbing on the couch, our baby asleep in his crib beside us. He said, "Stop asking her. She's never going to be the person you need. But some wounds make you keep knocking on doors you know will never open." When my son took his first steps, months of therapy, balancing, falls, and finally one wobbly little march across the living room, I sent her a video. She replied, "Even dogs learn to walk. Stop acting proud." At his first birthday party, she didn't come. But she showed up at my sister's kids' party the week before with armfuls of gold jewelry and cash envelopes. For my son? Nothing. When I asked her why, she told me flat out, "Yours isn't worth celebrating." Then she posted on Facebook, "Blessed with grandchildren," but only used my sister's kids' photos. I should have been used to it by then, but it cut like the first time all over again. And then came the night that broke whatever thread was left between us. My son spiked a fever out of nowhere. He was burning up, struggling to breathe, and we rushed him to the ER. My hands were shaking so badly, I couldn't even fill out the intake form. In that blind panic, I texted her, "We're at the hospital. Please pray for him." Her reply came an hour later. "Handle it yourself. I'm at a spa with real family." I stared at those words while the doctors worked on my son. My husband said, "Forget her. He's what matters." And as I held my baby boy in that hospital bed, wires taped to his tiny chest, I whispered to him, "You are my miracle. She'll never own you." Something in me hardened that night. A year later, my son was thriving, still smaller than some kids his age, but healthy, walking, laughing, proving every single one of her words wrong. And as his birthday rolled around again, I knew I had to make a choice. Not just for me, for him. Because if I kept letting her words drip into our lives, they'd poison him too. So I made a decision. A big one. And it left her knocking on my door one afternoon, screaming loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Please, I didn't mean it like that. But by then, it was far too late. After that night in the ER, I started looking at my life through a different lens. For so long, I'd been operating in this fog of hope that maybe, if I kept trying, if I kept inviting, if I kept including her, my mom would eventually change. But watching my son fight for breath while her only message to me was that she was with real family snapped something in me. I stopped telling her updates. No more texts about milestones. No more invites. No more pictures. My husband didn't even ask questions. He just nodded when I deleted her number from my phone and said, "Good. It's about time." But it wasn't enough to cut her out quietly. The problem with mothers like mine is that they don't just vanish. They rewrite the narrative to anyone who will listen. And sure enough, I started hearing from relatives. My aunt called and said, "Your mom's worried about you. She says you won't let her see the baby, that you're bitter." I laughed bitterly. Bitter? Maybe, but not in the way they thought. I told my aunt the truth, word for word, text for text. I sent screenshots of the things my mom had said, the "don't get excited," the failure, the spa with real family. The silence on the other end of the call said more than anything else. Still, I knew words would never be enough. My mom had built her whole identity around being the devoted grandmother to my sister's kids. She posted weekly pictures of them, bragged about their recitals, their grades, their little achievements. She curated this perfect Facebook persona, and people bought it. Meanwhile, my son was invisible to her. And somehow, that made me the bitter one. So I started keeping receipts. Literally. Every text, every ignored invitation, every time she skipped my son's birthday for my sister's kids, every cruel line she threw at me. I put them all in a folder. At first, I didn't know what I'd use it for. I just knew I needed to hold on to the truth, so I wouldn't let myself get gaslit into doubting what had actually happened. The decision I made came slowly, but once it landed, it felt inevitable. I met with a lawyer. We set up paperwork for a trust in my son's name. Every bit of extra money I could save, every bonus check, every side gig I picked up went into it. I didn't tell my mom, my dad, or even my sister. They thought I was just working too much and being antisocial. What I was really doing was laying down bricks for my son's future, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. And then came the big move. My mom didn't know I had stayed in touch with Grandpa's old friend, an estate lawyer who had always quietly disapproved of how my parents treated me. He called me one day and said, "I've seen what you're doing for your son. It reminds me of how your grandfather looked out for you. He'd be proud." That conversation lit a fire in me. I realized I didn't have to keep waiting for validation from people who'd never give it. I could build my own legacy, one that completely cut them out. So I did. I drafted a will. I locked everything I owned, my savings, my apartment, my life insurance, into a trust with my son as the sole beneficiary. I named guardians I trusted outside of my family. And most importantly, I made sure there was no legal way my parents could ever touch a dime. When the documents were finalized, I felt lighter. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to her cruelty. I was creating something stronger than her cruelty, something that would outlast her Facebook posts, her digs, her favoritism. My son would grow up knowing, without question, that he was wanted. Of course, word got out. Not from me, but from someone in the family who knew I'd been making big moves. My mom showed up at my apartment, banging on the door so hard the neighbors peeked out. When I finally opened it, she was red-faced, mascara smeared, yelling, "Please, I didn't mean it like that." I stood in the doorway, my son clutching my leg, watching her like she was a stranger. "Didn't mean what?" I asked. She started crying. Real tears this time, maybe. Or maybe she was just scared of being cut out completely. She rambled about how I'd misunderstood, how she didn't realize her words had hurt me that much, how she loved all her grandchildren equally. I laughed, a sharp, broken laugh. "Equally? You didn't even show up for his birthday. You called him weak. You told me he wasn't worth celebrating. That's not equal, Mom. That's erasure." Her face twisted. "But family?" "No," I cut her off. "Family shows up. Family cares. Family doesn't choose spa weekends over hospitals. You don't get to play the doting grandmother now." I closed the door in her face. My hands were shaking, but I didn't regret it for a second. After that, the call started. From my dad, my sister, even cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone had an opinion. Some thought I was cruel. Others said they admired me for finally standing up for myself. My mom. She kept sending long texts alternating between guilt trips and half-baked apologies. But I didn't reply. Because for once, my silence wasn't out of hope she'd change. It was out of certainty she never would. And I wasn't about to let my son grow up believing her version of love was normal. The trust was already in place. The boundaries were already set. And as far as I was concerned, the chapter with her in our lives was already closed. Of course, life has a way of making sure chapters don't close neatly. A few months later, something happened that made her crawl back harder than ever. Only this time, it wasn't about love. It was about desperation. And she had no idea just how prepared I was. It started with a voicemail. My phone buzzed in the middle of my shift, and when I checked later, it was my dad's voice, something I hadn't heard in months. Your mother's not doing so well. The bills are piling up. We need help. You've always been good with money, right? Maybe you could, chip in. Just for a little while. For family. I almost laughed out loud. The same man who once sneered that my nerd job wouldn't get me anywhere was now calling me for financial advice. For money? I didn't call back. But I knew this wasn't the end of it. Sure enough, the messages started piling up. My sister sent a text saying, "Look, I know mom has her flaws, but she's still our mom. She's worried about losing the house. You wouldn't let your own parents go homeless, would you?" Homeless. That word landed heavier than I expected. For a split second, I imagined my mom on the street, clutching a trash bag of her belongings. But then the other image slammed into me. My son, tiny and gasping for breath in the ER, while she was off sipping champagne at a spa and posting pictures of my sister's kids. No, my compassion didn't extend to someone who never gave it to me. When the begging didn't work, the guilt-tripping turned vicious. My dad called again, voice sharper this time. "We raised you. We sacrificed for you. And this is how you repay us?" With silence. I hit delete before the message finished. But then, things escalated. My mom showed up at my door again. This time she didn't scream or sob. She looked tired, hollow-eyed. She clutched a folder in her hands and shoved it toward me. "Please," she whispered. "Just look." Inside were overdue bills, foreclosure notices, collection letters. She wasn't lying. They were drowning. "You've done well for yourself," she said, trying to sound gentle. "We just need a little help. We're still your parents." I stared at her for a long moment. My son toddled into the room, clutching his toy truck, and looked up at her with curiosity. For a brief second, her face softened, like she wanted to kneel down, scoop him up, and pretend she cared. But then she caught herself, stiffened, and looked back at me instead. That was the moment it clicked. She didn't see him. Not really. He was just a prop in whatever narrative she was spinning. I handed the folder back. "You always told me not to waste money on things that wouldn't matter. That's how you treated me, and that's how you treated him. So no, I'm not wasting money on you." Her face went red. "You'll regret this. Blood is blood. You can't just erase us." I felt my chest tighten, but not from guilt. From relief. I already did. She left, slamming the door so hard my son flinched. I scooped him up and whispered, "You're safe. You're always safe with me." I thought that would be the end. But people like my mom don't go down quietly. 2 weeks later, at the family reunion, the showdown happened. I had debated not going, but my cousin convinced me it was for the kids, and she promised it would be low drama. Famous last words. The second I walked in, I felt eyes on me. My sister glared from across the room. My dad avoided eye contact, and my mom? She beelined straight to me, putting on her fakest smile. "There she is. My beautiful daughter," she said loudly, so everyone could hear. She grabbed my arm like we were close. "I was just telling everyone how proud I am of you." I almost choked. Proud? Of me? The woman who told me I'd lose everything, who mocked my son, who erased us from every family post. Something inside me snapped. I'd been quiet for too long. So when it was time for the family slideshow, the one my mom had put together with endless pictures of my sister's kids, I raised my hand. Actually, I brought something too. The room went quiet as I plugged in my laptop. My slideshow started playing. Photo after photo. My son's birthdays, where no one showed. Screenshots of texts where my mom told me not to waste blessings on him. Messages where she refused to babysit, skipped his milestones, dismissed his life as unworthy. Side by side with pictures of my son smiling bravely, blowing out candles alone, walking across our tiny living room, clutching my hand in the hospital. The silence was deafening. Finally, my brother muttered, "Jesus Christ." My sister hissed, "You didn't have to make it public." I turned to her. "Didn't I? Because privately, you all pretended this didn't happen. You let her erase us. You let her call my son worthless while cheering her on. I wanted you to see what that looks like. What she really looks like." My mom was pale, shaking. "You're cruel," she whispered. "No," I said, voice steady. "I'm honest. That's something you've never been." She stormed out, my dad chasing after her. My sister followed. muttering about how I'd humiliated the family. But you know what? Some people stayed behind. My cousin hugged me. Another aunt said quietly, "I always wondered why your son wasn't in the pictures. I'm glad I know the truth now." For once, I didn't feel invisible. Later that night, I tucked my son into bed and kissed his forehead. He didn't understand everything that had happened, but he understood this. I was there. I always would be. And while my mom was probably at home cursing my name, I lay there smiling because I had finally done what she never could, protected my child. And she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. After the reunion, I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. I thought she'd crawl back into her corner, lick her wounds, and leave me and my son alone. But if I've learned anything about my mom, it's that she doesn't take silence as defeat. She takes it as a challenge. 2 days later, I got a call from my job. HR asked me to come in. I walked into the office expecting some routine paperwork, but instead, my manager slid his phone across the table. On the screen was a long, furious email from my mom. She had written a 3-page manifesto about how unstable I was, how I used my child for sympathy, how I had a history of mental breakdowns that made me unfit for my position. She CC'd the CEO, for God's sake. I felt my stomach twist. I wanted to cry, to scream, but instead, I laughed. Because at the bottom of the email, she'd accidentally attached the wrong file. Instead of evidence of my instability, she attached one of her foreclosure notices. Clear proof she was spiraling, not me. My manager looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "I'm sorry," he said, "but clearly this isn't about you. This is about her. We'll handle it." That night, I sat in my car outside my apartment and just let myself feel the weight of it. She wasn't just trying to hurt me anymore. She was trying to erase me. My son's mom. The one person who had never abandoned him. And that was the breaking point. I called a lawyer the next day. I didn't go into detail, just explained that I needed protection from harassment, from defamation, from a woman who couldn't stand the fact that I had built a life without her. While the paperwork moved forward, my mom found other ways to claw at me. She started showing up at my son's school, trying to pick him up early by telling the staff she was his grandmother. She tried calling CPS, claiming I was unfit because I worked too much. She even called my ex, fishing for dirt, spinning stories about how I was trapping him into fatherhood. Every time, she failed. And every time, she got more desperate. One night, around midnight, I heard pounding at my door. I peeked through the peephole and saw her standing there, hair a mess, makeup streaked, screaming my name. "Please," she shrieked. I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean any of it. "Let me in." My son woke up crying in his room. I picked him up, pressed his head against my shoulder, and whispered, "It's okay, baby. She's not coming in." I didn't open the door. I didn't say a word. Eventually, she slumped onto the porch, sobbing, until my neighbors called the cops. When the flashing lights appeared, she tried to spin it as a family misunderstanding. But the officers weren't buying it. They gave me a chance to speak, and for the first time, I didn't hold back. "This woman has harassed me for years. She stalked me, smeared me, tried to sabotage my job, and now she's traumatizing my child. I want her gone." The officers nodded, calm but firm. They escorted her away, and I swear, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. The next morning, my lawyer called. The restraining order was in process. You'd think that would have been the end, but my family didn't see it that way. My sister called me, voice dripping with fury. "How could you do that to Mom? She's struggling. You're heartless." I almost laughed. Heartless? Do you want to hear what she said when my son was in the NICU? Do you want me to send you the texts where she called him worthless? Or should I forward you the email she sent to my boss, calling me insane? Silence. Then, a week, well, she didn't mean it. I hung up. Because here's the truth. People like my mom don't act alone. They have enablers, cheerleaders, people who smooth over the damage and tell the victims to let it go. For years, my sister played that role. Not anymore. I wasn't playing nice. Instead of just surviving her attacks, I started documenting everything. Every voicemail, every text, every email. I built a timeline of years of emotional abuse and neglect, not just against me, but against my son. And when my lawyer saw it, his eyes widened. "You know," he said slowly, "if this ever escalated to custody or estate issues, this evidence would bury her. She wouldn't just lose credibility. She'd lose everything." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping cold coffee while my son slept. I thought about all the years she tried to convince me I was worthless, all the milestones she dismissed, all the birthdays she ignored, all the times she replaced me with my sister's kids in her carefully curated, perfect family posts. And now, she was the one begging. She was the one on the edge of losing everything. It was almost poetic. But here's the part no one really talks about. Revenge doesn't feel as sweet as you think. At least not in the moment. Because as much as I hated her, as much as I wanted her out of my life, there was still this ache deep in my chest. This was my mom. The person who was supposed to protect me. The person who should have been my son's biggest cheerleader. But she wasn't. She never was. And I couldn't save her. So I decided to do the only thing I could. Protect us. Fully. Permanently. And the move I made next? That was the one that finally flipped her world upside down. The morning after the cops escorted her off my porch, I sat on the couch with my son in my lap, staring at the stack of paperwork from my lawyer. The restraining order, the documentation, the evidence I had collected, it was all spread out on the coffee table like a roadmap of my entire childhood. Every insult, every dismissal, every cruel little moment I thought I'd buried was right there in black and white. And for the first time, I realized something. She'd never stop. Even if the courts kept her away physically, she'd still find ways to claw at me. Through my sister, through gossip, through manipulation. She lived for control. So I made the choice. The one I'd avoided for years because some part of me kept hoping she would change. I decided to cut her out completely. Legally, financially, emotionally, permanently. That week, I set up a trust in my son's name. Every cent I had saved, every asset, every benefit I worked for, it all bypassed her, my dad, my sister. No one in that family would ever touch a dime of what I built. I filed paperwork to ensure that, in the event of anything happening to me, guardianship of my son would go to a close friend I trusted like a sibling, not my blood relatives. My lawyer raised his eyebrows when I said it out loud, but he nodded. That's your right. And honestly, that's the smartest move you could make. It felt like closing a door. Heavy, final, but also freeing. A month later, the family reunion rolled around. Against my better judgment, I went. Not for them, but for me, to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid anymore. When I walked in, my mom's face went pale. My dad muttered something under his breath. My sister shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. But me? I walked tall, my son holding my hand, his little backpack bouncing as he skipped beside me. It didn't take long for the tension to break. My mom cornered me near the buffet table, her voice low and venomous. How could you do this to me? To us? Do you know how humiliating it is to be treated like a stranger by your own daughter? I stared at her calm. Do you know how humiliating it is to have your own mother call your child worthless? To have her show up at his school pretending to be his guardian? To tell the world I was unstable just because I wouldn't play your game? She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. You lost the right to be my mom when you decided my pain was less important than your pride. And you lost the right to be his grandma the day you told me not to waste blessings on him. That was it. That was the end. Her eyes went glassy. For a second, I saw something crack, fear, maybe even regret, but it was buried under layers of anger. You'll regret this, she spat. I smiled. Already did. For years. But not anymore. I walked away. The fallout came fast. My sister called me that night, screaming about how I was tearing the family apart. I let her rant until she ran out of breath, then said, "No, Mom tore it apart. I just stopped taping the pieces together." Then I hung up. My dad tried his hand too. He left me a voicemail. "We raised you. We fed you. You owe us." I played it back 3 times before deleting it. Because here's the thing, raising me was their job. It wasn't a favor. It wasn't a loan. And they failed at it. Miserably. Meanwhile, my mom's life started unraveling in ways I didn't even have to touch. The restraining order meant she couldn't come near me or my son without risking arrest. Her foreclosure notices kept piling up. The perfect family image she tried to project online started cracking when people noticed she never mentioned me, never posted about her miracle grandson. And me? For the first time, I felt light. I poured myself into work, into building stability for my son, into making memories with people who actually wanted to be there. Friends became family. My son grew up knowing love that was steady and unconditional, not transactional and cruel. Then one afternoon, about a year later, I was in the kitchen when I heard frantic pounding at the door. My stomach dropped. I knew that sound. I opened the blinds just enough to peek. There she was, my mom, hair wild, eyes red, screaming through tears. Please. I didn't mean it like that. For a moment, I froze. All those old instincts bubbled up, the urge to comfort, to explain, to hope. But then I looked at my son, who had peeked around the corner, clutching his toy car. He didn't need that chaos. He didn't deserve that pain. So I walked back, picked him up, and whispered, "She'll never own you. Not ever." And I didn't open the door. The cops came again. She left again, and I haven't seen her since. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it. If I regret cutting off my entire family. If I regret not giving her one last chance. The truth? I regret wasting as many chances as I did. My son is thriving. He's smart, kind, funny, resilient. And every milestone he hits, every time he proves her words wrong, I feel like we win. So no, I don't regret it. Because the family I lost, they were never really mine to begin with. And the family I've built, that's the legacy my son will inherit. Not her bitterness, not her cruelty. Just love, real love,